Hi, I'm Tim Packer. Welcome back. We talked last time about how creating sellable art is great work with a unique voice. Now, the important thing is, how do we go about creating a unique voice? And that, my friend, is the $1,000 question. For me, that was 5 years of painting, searching for that unique voice until I was able to come up with this style. And one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got was from Zoltan Szabo, who, one of the modern gods of watercolor, who I was fortunate enough to know the last couple of years of his life. And when I met him, I was painting in high realism, mainly portraits. I was doing a lot of portrait commissions in both watercolors and oils. And by this time, I'd achieved a fair bit of success as a portrait painter. I'd been elected as a senior signature member in the Canadian Institute of Portrait Artists, and I was elected a member of the Canadian Society of Painters in Watercolor. And I was spending, like I say, almost all of my time painting portraits. I knew I wanted to paint landscapes, but I also knew that I just couldn't use the same sort of techniques that I used in my portraiture for landscape. And I knew that Zoltan was one of my heroes. And when I had the opportunity to go take a workshop with him, I jumped at it. And he said something to me during that first workshop that really it was sometimes you get someone saying the exact right thing at the exact right time when you're ready to hear it. And what he said to me, he said, Tim, he said, you've got the technical skill to paint anything in the world. And you can paint it in oils, you can paint it in watercolor. Your technical skill is amazing, and you paint great realistic works. And if you decide that that's where you want your career to stay and focus on, then that's great. But just be aware that it's a choice. There's more out there. So it's great that you can paint the world, but wouldn't it be great if you could paint your own world that was unlike the world created by anyone else? You create your own world on canvas that was unique to you. And wouldn't it be a shame if we never got to find it? The world never got to see it because it never even occurred to you to look for it. And that was exactly what I needed to hear. I was actually becoming sort of bored with there's a whole lifetime of spent developing the skills involved in drawing to be able to capture the world accurately. And then I invested, a lot of time in composition and to be able to compose great pictures. But for me, once I had chosen the pose and created the composition, then it was just hours and hours of execution to get to a place where I knew where it was going to be. And it was just all hard work, and the magic had kind of gone out of it. And so I started to search for my own voice. And I came across this concept. It was actually through a member of the Canadian Watercolor Society, Ed Shawcross, who had become a good friend of mine, and we talked a lot about art. And he was the first person I'd ever had that talked about two very different modes that we paint in. And one is process-oriented, and one is product-oriented. And product-oriented, the best way I can describe that is when you're painting in product mode, you really, really want the painting to succeed. You need for it to succeed. So the best example of that would be like if I was doing a portrait commission and I had already taken a down payment on the piece, then obviously I want that piece to turn out because there's a lot of pressure that people are expecting it. They've already paid me some money. And when you're in product mode, this is what's really important. You only use the skills, techniques, materials, concepts that you're absolutely confident in. Because as I said in my last video, a painting can only be as good as its weakest link. So, in product mode, when I'm doing if I was doing a portrait commission, that's not the time to say, oh, I've never used one of these oil sticks. I wonder what that would look like, because it might ruin the painting. So in product mode, we only use the skills, concepts, techniques, materials that we're extremely competent and confident in, and that should produce a consistent result in terms of the quality of the painting. Whatever your skill level is, you should hit that every time. So that's the good thing about product mode. The bad thing about product mode is that level that your painting is at, it's never going to change. You're only ever going to paint to that level. And I see that happening a lot out there with artists where they learn a fair bit in the early parts of their careers, and they achieve a reasonable level of competency in their work. And then they do that for the next 20 years and the work never moves. And that's because they're painting in product mode. Now, process is something entirely different. Process is there's no expectation that the finished painting will turn out. It could just be a 2-hour experiment to go, oh, I'm not going to do that again. And that's what's really important to understand in process mode, that process is where you try things. So you try new techniques, new concepts, new mediums, new brushes, new ways of applying the paint, new ways of approaching a painting. You play the what if game. You know, if someone says you should always paint your, the typical way of painting, you should paint your sky first, then your background, then your middle ground, then your foreground. Process is where you go, well, what if I do it the opposite? What if I paint the foreground first and then move back? Or what if I, tone my canvas yellow, or tone it red, or tone it black, or, start in acrylic, or paint with a knife? Or this is when you're just playing a what if game, and it's kind of like the more out there you are, the better. And what you're doing is you're learning. You're learning what works, and you're learning what doesn't work, and you're improving that skill set. So first of all, you're having more tools in your belt to use during a painting. And also, when you're trying things that are radically different, your paintings are going to look radically different. Now, a lot of them are going to be bad, and that's okay. But hopefully, if you've worked to achieve a very high skill level, just in terms of drawing, painting, applying paint, that kind of thing, and you've worked to achieve a really, really good basis in composition, even the ones that don't turn out that great, or where you go, I don't know, this is not me, I don't want to stay here, it still may be a painting that's very attractive, and it still may sell. Well, I spent, during this time when I was trying to find my voice, I spent 5 years of about half my time was spent painting the portrait commissions, and the other half was just playing in the studio. And I did everything. I worked in casein, I worked in acrylic, I worked in pastel, I worked in oils, I mixed these medias together, I did landscape, I did abstract. I was just all over the map. One of my friends, actually an artist friend, asked me if I was mildly schizophrenic. He said, because it looks like there's 100 different artists in you trying to get out. And it is actually kind of true. There wasn't 100 artists trying to get out, but there was 100 different ways of painting, of trying to paint, that I wanted to try to see if I liked it. And eventually, this way that I paint now came about. And then that's really when my life changed. It's like I knew when I kind of stumbled, and stumbled is the right word. There's a lot of dead ends when you're in process mode, but you just have to do it. You'll find some things that you really like and that turn out really well, and so you just keep going with that. It's a very organic process where your style evolves. The important thing is, again, I just cannot stress enough, that you don't scurry back to product mode when you're working in process and paintings fail, because they're supposed to fail. They're not all going to work, but process is where you have breakthroughs. Process is where you have these eureka moments where all of a sudden you do something and you go, oh my God, that's better than anything I've ever done before. Or you do something and you go, oh my God, that's great, but it also looks unique. I don't know anyone else that paints that way. And that's the kind of stuff that happens in process. And so you need to spend time there. When I stumbled upon this current style of mine, and it was, again, much cruder than it is now, but still very recognizable if you saw my early work to doing this, I went into a big art festival in Toronto and basically sold out in 4 days, did almost $30,000 worth of sales, and my life has never been the same. And that's getting back to what I mentioned before too, that if you can create great work with a unique voice, once you stumble upon that, then the world is not going to be shy about letting you know. They're going to be lined up and wanting to take your paintings home with them. So the difference, process and product mode. We need to spend time in both. And if you spend time in product mode, your work is never going to grow. You're never going to grow as an artist. And more importantly, if you're a professional artist, the demand for your work is not going to grow. if the world right now is just not that into what you're doing, it's not an advertising problem, it's not a marketing problem, it's an artwork problem. You need to, again, continually grow and advance as an artist until you get to that place where you can produce great work with a unique voice. Once you've achieved that, then it becomes a marketing problem. Then it becomes a publicity problem and getting more people to see it because they're going to fall in love with it. But you cannot take, moderately competent work that kind of looks a lot like other artists' work and raise the price of it through a marketing initiative or through publicity or through galleries exposure or whatever. The most important thing in your development as an artist is to be able to again continually advance your craft and your skill set and your knowledge so that you can produce great work with a unique voice. So yeah, that's it for now. Come back to me next time. We're going to talk about the next step in determining, how you know when you've achieved your unique voice and if that's something you want to stick with. So I'll see you next time.